welcome back to How to Write a Melody. I'm Avi from Musical.Engineering, and if you feel like you have this melody stuff in the bag, I put together a free guide that goes through 7 different tools you can use to elevate any melody that you've already written which doesn't quite live up to your standards. Just head to Musical.Engineering and tell me where to send it. Now in the last video, we talked about how we can use a chord progression to guide us in what notes we want to hit while writing a melody. In this final part of the How to Write a Melody series, I really want to dive into the deep end and introduce you to a powerful concept: form. Alright, for this last tool that we're going to talk about, this one's a bit more advanced, but it's super useful, equally useful for creating full-fledged melodies that hit every single note. I'm sorry, I had to. These forms are primarily used in classical music, but you do hear them in popular music too. Form is a concept unto itself. When I say form, I mean, utilizing very specific formulas, you can really think about them as, and they tell you where and how to resolve, as well as clear directions on what to do with the notes themselves. Now, in this example, I'll be using a piano exercise that I did in Sibelius using what's called a sentence. Here you can see the general outline of a sentence. We'll go into Sibelius real quick, and this is it. Now here you can see the basic structure of a sentence, and this is some form practice that I was doing a little while ago, and you can see basic idea right here. You probably heard me mention this earlier, and what this is essentially, a 1 or 2 measure, even 3 measure, just idea with maybe a couple of chords in it, and it's really just a kind of like mini fragment of something that you can turn into something bigger. And let's take a listen to it first. Let's take a look at the structure here. So we have our basic idea, and then we have a repetition of the basic idea, but this time in under a different chord, usually the dominant chord, the 5/7, which is, remember that 5 from the half cadence that we talked about in step 1, and in our structures. So then what happens is there's fragmentation. So what that means is we take maybe one measure, in this case, one measure over here from the basic idea is just being repeated, and then the liquidation, which we kind of touched on earlier, is now you see we have much slower rhythmic subdivisions happening until we get to an even slower one, and in this case we are ending on a half cadence. And what's useful about that is then we can start another period, and the way I was using that is to start another period here, so it kind of sounded like this continuous motion. So let's take a look. You can probably hear, if you've ever heard any kind of classical music before, especially Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, Schubert, that type of stuff, this will probably sound kind of familiar to you. It might sound like those kinds of melodies. It's very instrumental and very commonly used form for a very long time, for centuries. So let's take a listen to how it sounds a little bit more. And remember, this is telling you what chords to use. It's just all you have to do is come up with this little 2-measure thing, and you can turn that into this sentence. And there are other forms like periods and ways to organize sentences and periods. But the reason I chose sentences is because it kind of gives you more feeling of development, like more is happening. The period can sometimes feel a little more basic, for lack of a better word. So let's listen to a couple of more of these sentences, and then we'll go over some more aspects of the form. So, if you were wondering what these Roman numerals are underneath a staff here, these are what we use to denote harmonic functions in a key. So in this case, the first is in A minor. So we have a little one, and the second example was in C major. The third example also in A minor. So I want to talk a little bit more about the way the sentence is created. It's basically broken down into two main sections. We have the presentation phase, and this is where we state the basic idea right over here. And so over here you can hear the basic idea would be. That's more or less the basic idea. Then we just have a descending line. Now, this can just be a two-measure phrase, usually using the first chord in a key or the tonic. And it's the basic idea can then be repeated either exactly or using another chord. In this case, we used another chord. We used the dominant or the 5. Notice how often the chords are changing here. So far, we have 2 measures per chord. Not a whole lot of movement is happening. So the next phrase is called the continuation. This phase is where things get kind of cool. We can take the basic idea and start fragmenting it. And fragmentation is when we take parts of a basic idea or melody and chop it up. So in this example, we're fragmenting the basic idea by using just the first measure and repeating it, but reharmonized with a different chord. Now we're only using 1 measure per chord. The penultimate measure here is increasing the harmonic rhythm, or how fast the chords change, even more to 2 chords per measure right over there. We have the same thing going on down here, 2 chords per measure, following now 1 chord per measure, versus before we had 1 chord per 2 measures in the beginning. Now, this is where we applied liquidation. You can see liquidation right over here. And this is where we basically throw the basic idea out the window, and our job here is to just get to a cadence. Now we can use either a half cadence or you can use an authentic cadence, whichever one you want, depending on what you want to do. In this case, I chose the half cadence because I wanted to just keep this exercise going and just keep writing more and more sentences. But you can also use the same formula and resolve to 1, do an authentic cadence, and that'll feel like we've arrived, like we're at rest. Notice really quick how the continuation phase adds, subtracts, and develops the basic idea. As we noticed above, we also see what's called harmonic acceleration, which is where the harmonic rhythm that we talked about earlier increases. And you can see that happening right over here, harm-ac. As we're going ahead with this, we have more chords happening in more time. That's all for this video. Hopefully you now have some solid techniques you can use intentionally when you're trying to overcome writer's block or just trying to write a song for fun. Now, if you're not satisfied with your melody, which happens to be more often than I'd care to admit, I put together a free guide that explicitly outlines 7 different ways you can take your existing melody and elevate it to make it more effective than it already is. It's an amazing value. Just go to musical.engineering and tell me where you want me to send your free guide. Now, if you enjoyed this series, please let me know. Leave a comment, like the video, subscribe to the channel, go get my free guide, send me an email. I really want to know if you guys are enjoying it or how I can bring more value to the content that I'm putting out. So until next time, I'm Avi from musical.engineering.